Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. We're back looking at another league list for, of course, the Summer Quest. Now, this is probably as fake as the other two, but who knows? Maybe something's real, maybe something's not. We live in an interesting time. Let's get into it. The first vehicle is the MiG-27H. Now, the MiG-27H is a Indian upgrade of the licensed-built MiG-27L. Basically, this is technically an indigenous Indian vehicle, which is kind of interesting. Basically, they took a MiG-27L, they added French avionics to it, and also added a bunch of different stuff internally in its electronics, plus also a new set of radar with the French EVGA or the Russian Komar radar being used. This gives it more capabilities in the form of anti-ship, but also air-to-air capabilities. They also added a new multifunction display mission setup, display processors, a good old gyro in there too. There's also GPS navigation, new HUD completely. There's now a new data link in it as well. Basically, every piece of electronics you can think of, which is internal to the vehicle, has been switched out and improved. The HMS McKay is also on the list, and this is one of those interesting vehicles because it's a destroyer which was built and launched in or at least close to the First World War in December of 1918, and it was scrapped eventually in 1949. This thing was commissioned in 1919 and actually served through all of the Second World War. So this wasn't a machine that got replaced. It actually was able to find a role in the Second World War, even though it was definitely not in a huge setup to do so. It's an Admiralty-type flotilla leader. Basically, this was a class of 8 destroyer leaders which were designed and built for the Royal Navy near the end of the First World War. So they used a lot of the ideas from the First World War to build it. It had 5 4.7-inch guns on it, 1 3-inch anti-aircraft gun, and also 2 2-pounder guns as well. One of the things to note, though, is it did get upgraded during the Second World War, where they did add a ton of different AA armaments to it, and also a bunch of torpedoes were also put on it during its time. So it also had a radar installed, 10 depth charge setup as well, and even at the same time, a twin 6-pounder setup replaced one of the 4.7-inch setups. So technically you could get like a few different variants of this machine over the setup. It also as well was used, as I said, during the Second World War quite a lot. The culmination of its actions meant that it was deployed in the Normandy landings and escorted convoys to the beaches from the 7th of June, and also remained on escorting invasion follow-up convoys until July, when it returned to the east coast. And then after the German surrender, McKay assisted in the liberation of Norway, escorting with Viceroy 9 minesweepers to Trondheim, arriving there on the 17th of May, and visiting Bergen on the 9th, and then it was eventually scrapped, unfortunately, afterwards, but at the same time was able to survive quite a long time for these types of destroyers. And then we have a battleship, or battle cruiser, or capital ship, depending on who you ask. It's the Gneisenau. It's a good old German capital ship, and this one was a big one during the Second World War. It had access to a really fun armament and was also part of the Scharnhorst class, which of course we've already seen in game. The Gneisenau is one of those vehicles which has done a little bit more than some others of its caliber during the Second World War, but unfortunately didn't survive it. The vehicle itself, weirdly enough, was launched pre-World War II and commissioned in service in 1938, but then it was decommissioned in 1942. Basically, what ended up happening is in 1941, it was used and participated in Operation Weserübung, which was the German invasion of Norway. And during this time, it was engaged by the HMS Renown and then also the HMS Glorious, which was an aircraft carrier, which was a refitted battlecruiser, which is a cool story, and we actually have it in game as the battlecruiser. So it sank the HMS Glorious, but it took a lot of damage from the HMS Renowned, and then also was torpedoed by the HMS Clyde, which was a British submarine. And then, after another successful raid in the Atlantic in 1941, Gneisenau and the Scharnhorst went to Brest in France, which is in the northwestern tip of France. And the two ships were once again bombed to all heck, I think is probably the best way of putting it. So in early 1942, the two ships decided that they just needed to go. So they sped up through the English Channel from occupied France to Germany, and after reaching Kiel in early February, the ship went into dry dock to try and fix it. And then there was another air attack which went after it. There was one bomb which penetrated the armored deck and exploded the forward ammunition, causing serious damage and many casualties. So the repairs that were needed were incredibly time-consuming, so instead what was decided was they would take off the 28cm guns, replace it with 38cm guns, and use the 28s as shore batteries. But since the work was going to take too long, it was all cancelled and it never actually came to be. So instead, it was used as a block ship in Gottenhafen, which sucks because once again, it's another legendary ship which just had a horrific end. A block ship is basically one that you stick in the middle of a river, channel, or canal, and basically to block other ships going through. So you deliberately sink it to be able to stop vehicles getting past. So that kind of sucks that happens to such a crazy ship. So the armament, it had 9 28cm guns, 12 15s, 14 105s, 16 37s, and then 10 20mm with also some torpedo tubes as well on top of it. But it's just another example of why battleships kind of became a thing of the past after the Second World War in most cases because air was so dominant. The last vehicle is the K1E1, which is a basic upgrade package for the K1 tank, which of course is from South Korea. South Korea has a bunch of MBTs, including the K1, the K1A1, and of course the K2 Black Panther, which is probably the most, I suppose, known one at this moment. The K1E1 is more of a side upgrade of the standard K1, where basically what they've added to the K1 is a digital battlefield management systems. You've got the IFF equipment, surveillance cameras on the front and rear, and it's expected that all K1 tanks will be upgraded to the K1E1 standard by 2026. And the K1E1s started deliveries in 2014. But pretty much everything else about the vehicle is pretty much the same as the standard K1. So it's got the 1200 horsepower diesel engine, the 8-cylinder. Then also you have access to the 105mm, the KM68A1 rifled with 10 degrees of gun depression, and all of the standard protection on these types of vehicles. A lot of people liken the K1 to the XM1, which is fair, since, America did have a hand in helping build it, but also by the time of the K1E1, the K1A1, and the K2, I would say that the Koreans have created their own individual thing. The vehicle itself also has been developed to try and make the setup easier for the crew, developing a new air conditioning unit, not just for the K1A1, but also adapting it for the E1, which of course will make life a little bit easier. With stuff like the Korean voice lines added to the game, and also general chats going through about Korea and where they could end up, this is a definite possibility. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Millie Draper, Juan the Panda, Nick R. Kupila, Carrion Crow, Gus Irenicus, Pyman, Merciless Reaper, Orange Tail, Teddy, Daniel Stanton, Moxie B. Young, Peter Grayling, Jerry Provolt, Bareen, Alan Hacker, Sem Arslan, Uncle Bean, Derek R, and Lafouche for supporting the channel.